I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop.
You need to leave time to have your emotional self catch up with your physical self. So that was a lesson, again, I learned, fortunately, and that I then applied to my future travels. It's like, all right, don't just hit the ground and start running, because you are going to burn out quickly over a period of days. Just get yourself adjusted to a new place, a new language, new people. Settle in, and then, go to work. And I always tried to treat my film crews, a bit that way as well. You wanted to have celebrations and some time off during the period that you had brought people to remote locations to shoot these documentary films.
That is the wonderful Mike Day. He's our guest today. You can check him out over at MikeDayTravels.com. He's got a book. It's called The World Has a Big Backyard: Adventure Travel Stories from an IMAX Documentary Filmmaker. Mike has served as the executive producer on more than a dozen documentary films made in the world's largest film format, IMAX. It's led him to meet some incredible people all over the world and visit some of the world's most interesting places. And I love to talk to people that have figured out different ways to travel the world. In this case, we're going to look at travel through the lens. Yes, I'm using that word, through the lens of a producer of documentary films. And he's got some stories to share today and some incredible tips around travel and mindfulness, how to handle uncomfortable cultural experiences that you don't necessarily agree with, how to deal with those in the moment, travel well-being and self-care on the road. We get to hear his story working with the iconic, the legendary Jane Goodall, and loads more. It's a fascinating conversation. I know you're going to love it, and it's coming at you right now in this episode. So buckle up, strap in. Thanks for being here, and welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show, my friend. Thanks for hanging out, letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is, of course, the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. And quickly, I want to invite you to join our newsletter. It's free if you haven't signed up yet. ZeroToTravel.com/newsletter. Sign up over there. I got some exciting stuff going on off the podcast, and I want to keep you looped in, and that is totally free, so you can join the community over there. And thanks for being a part of the listening community here. Later on in this show, after the interview, I'm going to give a shout out to a listener who just dropped me an email, who has taken a smart strategy towards his life of travel, I think. So I want to share a little bit around that and this community story. I'll also leave you with a quote on the back end. Without further ado, I do want to slip and slide into this conversation with Mike Day. You know, the way I was nomadic for a decade plus was by having all sorts of travel jobs that required travel, allowed me to earn money while I was traveling and pay my bills and save money for other travels in between my jobs. And I'm always excited by the fact that people can find ways to travel with their work. And that doesn't necessarily always mean working as a remote professional or having your own online business. And I think that we can get kind of stuck in those bubbles, at least on the internet, where we, if you want to be a digital nomad, you want to kind of work remotely or take your work with you, we kind of can get sucked into that content or that world of this means you're going to be on your computer and you're going to do some kind of online business. And Mike's a great example of somebody who's built an incredible, exciting life of travel as a documentary filmmaker in the IMAX format, and what a world of experience he brings, not only his travel experience to this conversation, but also his work experience, share some great advice along the way. And I just think also I'm taking this opportunity as we get into the conversation for this to just serve as a reminder that there are many ways that you can travel the world, and that you can combine that with a career that you love. And I just will leave it at that. So let's dive in. Please enjoy my chat with Mike, and I will see you on the other side. Awesome to have you here. I want to formally say, Mike Day, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about your book and all the good stuff today. I mean, you have been one of the lucky individuals to get paid to travel the world. It sounds like you've had a very interesting career, fulfilling, it seems like, anyway, from what I've read, doing the production on all these IMAX documentaries. Wow. I mean, that's not a...
Yeah, I have been very fortunate. It's, producing documentary films, film scouting, film shooting, what was a real growth industry, a lot of conferences and business meetings around the world, from the tallest sand dunes in Namibia to Jane Goodall's research site on the eastern shore of Lake Tanganyika. Yes, I've been from Singapore to Iceland, and all for work. So
yeah. Well, it started working in the museum, right? I mean, this is where it all comes from. How did you end up choosing a career working in a museum, or did that choose you somehow?
I grew up in Chicago, which is a great museum city, and I really just fell in love with museums. And even as a kid, I wondered how can I come in the back door and come here more often, and it ended up to be a career. And I was also very motivated by my high school geography class. In the south suburbs of Chicago, here you are in kind of the sterile environment. And I was like, hey, I want to get out of the class. I don't want to just look at these National Geographic magazines. I want to fall in the pages. So I was fortunate, finished at the University of Illinois, went to work for a very progressive park district that wanted to develop science programming. My portfolio led me to be awarded a New York State Arts Council grant in museum management, and they sent me to Rochester, New York. Well, Rochester is the home of Eastman Kodak, and this is at a time, of course, when thousands of people were working to make film, and Kodak was king in the film world. So as part of my museum internship, I was exposed to my first work in film, and it was at a time when IMAX film was coming into museums. It really had a growth period that began with the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C., building an IMAX theater and producing a film there called To Fly. And a lot of other museums followed, including a museum in St. Paul, Minnesota, who recruited me to come there and go to work for them. And not just to have an IMAX theater that was exhibiting films, but to the credit of the board of trustees of this museum, they wanted to be making films. And so that was part of my responsibility at the museum. And it gave me the tough duty of traveling the world to capture these places and events in IMAX film.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So was it the museums that gave IMAX its first niche that propelled it to being a universal thing?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The growth of the IMAX film format really began in museums, and museums worldwide. Of course, now IMAX commercially is very successful because they came into the commercial cinema world. And to their credit, not only had they developed the finest film format in existence, but they have very successfully made the transition from film to the digital world. And the end of my working career, I was very fortunate to be working as a beta site in St. Paul, Minnesota, to help make that conversion. And they're still the finest format in the world. I mean, Yeah, if you're going to go see a movie, I am certainly a guy who says I'm going to go see it in an IMAX theater, and they've done a very good job of sort of concentrating, their emphasis on films that are ideal for the IMAX format, the big event films, the Oppenheimer films, kind of thing. So
Yeah,
they,
gotcha. You said you imagined what it would be like being on the other side in terms of working in the museums, but I have never spoken with anybody who has been part of can we call it the museum industry? I don't know much about it. It seems like there's a lot of opportunity for collaborations and for moving around and in terms of a career. Did you spend the majority of your career at the Science Museum in Minnesota? Is that where you mostly?
That's certainly where I was headquartered. But to your point, yes, we can call it the museum industry. And a couple of strengths of that industry are, first of all, collaboration, which is to say our museum was part of an exhibit collaborative that produced exhibits that toured through the collaborative, museums. I actually legally incorporated in the state of Minnesota a nonprofit consortium of 6 museums. Their commonality was they were all science museums. They were all in the US, and they were all using the IMAX film format on giant dome screens, IMAX dome theaters. And we pooled our monies to produce films. And that worked out very, very successfully in terms of, the rate at which we were able to produce new films and films that we really wanted to have done. Films with good science stories.
Yeah. What did being in a museum filled with science things, I'll say it because that's a terrible way to describe it. Science things. No, you know what I mean? I'm just being around all of the history, the scientific history and all of it. I mean, what does that teach you about your place in the world as a human?
Oh, yeah, great question, because I recognize that my place, if you look at my credits on the film projects, I'm the executive producer. So I'm the person that sort of is the leader of the band. And there's so many interesting people and such interesting talents in the museum world. I recognize that the best thing I can do is let's identify, the best talent for the best stories, and then bring together the financing and the cooperative, museums, and put these projects together. And that was fun. So it's like, even though I was headquartered in St. Paul, Minnesota, I was probably traveling 50% of my time. And part of that was just building these partnerships, especially with museums and the talent we were going to use. I'll give you an example. The last film I did is a film called Ancient Caves. So we were always looking for, great science stories that worked best on the giant screen. So in this case, the story is the story of a woman who's a paleoclimatologist. As a matter of fact, I write about her right in the first chapter of my book because I think it's a story of how taking young people traveling can really lead to life experiences that motivate them in terms of careers that they pick. So Dr. Gina Mosley at the University of Innsbruck, she's an English woman. She always told the story about how her mother, who was the adventurous one in the family, took them on a family holiday in southern England, and mom signed them up for a day of caving. And this young woman, this teenage girl, fell in love with it, and now she's grown up to be a paleoclimatologist. She spends her career going into caves around the world. You bring out geologic specimens, which are, through their analysis, mapping the climate history of the planet over the last 500,000 years. Well, what a great story to tell in the IMAX format, because then we could be taking viewers into those caves, the most interesting of which were underwater caves. And we just have some spectacular filming in caves to tell that story of ancient caves.
It's really interesting because you sort of fell into the film world in some ways, like stumbled into it, right? Because that's the craziest job you could have in the movie
Jason,
industry.
I won't deny it. There was just good luck along the way. The world was evolving and technology was evolving, and I somehow stepped on that moving the sidewalk and have just kept it for a career. And as I say, I got to work with great people and got to pick projects that I really had an interest in and really wanted to then share with audiences around the world.
Well, we're going to talk about the book, The World Has a Big Backyard, by the way. Great title. Love that title. And you tell some of the stories behind the travels and the films. And I have a list of some of the documentaries you made here, which all sound like it would be an incredible experience to be a part of these. National Parks Adventure, the Jane Goodall Wild Chimpanzees. I want to hear the Jane Goodall story. I read it, but I want you to share that with people. One on Cuba, there was Search for Great Sharks. You spent 7 years filming volcanoes at one point.
7 years.
I mean, talk about persistence.
Absolutely. You had to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to dive into some of the individual stories there, but what gets you excited about documenting these things and sharing them? Because it's a bit of a legacy now that you've created, being involved with all of this, and, you know, having these films that didn't exist now exist, these natural wonders documented in a certain way and stories told. And those things stick around long after we do. So, what is the meaning for you?
Well, you know, it's interesting in terms of the timing of all of this. I actually retired from my museum work with my last film project, the one I talked about, Ancient Caves. We hosted the world premiere of that film in March, the first week of March 2020 in St. Paul, Minnesota. And there were people in from around the world who'd been involved in the production of the film. And it was a great opening weekend. And the next week, as was always on the calendar, that was the week I was going to retire. And I went into my office to, pick up the last of my boxes. And what happened the second week of March 2020? The pandemic was declared. So my spouse and I retreated to our lake house on the north shore of Lake Superior in Minnesota. She was working remotely. I was retired. I was socially isolated. What was I going to do with my time? Well, it was good fortune because I always wanted more time to do two things, which was to read and write. And I opened my boxes. I call them treasure chests. They really were Tupperware tubs, but they were full of artifacts that I had collected along the way from my travels. And they just stimulated all these incredible memories of my travels. And I just sat down and I just started to write. And I recognized as I was writing this book, I certainly wanted to share travel stories and filmmaking stories with people, but I wanted there to be more. I wanted this book to have some purpose. And I recognized that, when you travel, even as an experienced travel, and the thing that I think inhibits some people is the fact that there's uncertainty, unpredictability, uncontrollability in travel. There's travel anxiety. And so I wanted to share with people, tips, things that I had learned along the way and some things I learned the hard way to help them deal with some of these anxieties. The purpose of my book, it really is a journey of self-development for the reader to cultivate a mindset for more interesting and authentic travel experiences. I truly believe that the best gift that you can give to others, give to yourself, and give especially to young people is travel. And I want people to reach beyond the easy travel, pass up on going to the water park or to the amusement park, especially with young people, and go seeking authentic experiences that are going to ignite the senses, spark wonder, stretch your understanding of the world, and especially maybe stretch your understanding of self. So I hope that my book is both fun and interesting, but again, I hope that it helps you cultivate this mindset to reach a little farther when you're planning your travel.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment. I know you love earning travel rewards and cash back, and that's why you're going to love Rakuten. With Rakuten, you can earn cash back on everything you need to book your dream trip, hotels, flights, rental cars, experiences, and more, while still booking through your favorite travel sites. And don't worry, cash back can be earned on top of earning the credit card points and the hotel and airline loyalty points that matter most to you, depending on how you make your booking. Plus, with Rakuten, you can also earn cash back on groceries and other purchases like electronics, pet supplies, and more. And the best part, you can join today for free and start earning cash back on top of your travel rewards. Go to Rakuten.com or get the app. That's Rakuten, Rakuten. Rakuten, the most rewarding way to shop. Now, back to the show. Well, what is your number one tip for managing what you described as the travel anxiety?
I think that the number one thing, and I write about this early in my book, is respect. You learn to respect other places, you learn to respect people, and you learn to respect yourself. You've got to be cognizant of self-care, especially as you're traveling and traveling long distance and traveling in difficult places. And I'll tell you my number one tip with respect respecting yourself. My number one tip is give yourself a win. I say to people, plan a win during the course of your travel so that when you've had to deal with all of the challenges, you know late in your trip you have a win. So for example, my wife and I, we go camping up in the Pacific Northwest in the temperate rainforest. You know, what can be worse than breaking tent camp in the rain? Everything's wet and soggy. So after a week of this camping, I made sure that the last night that we were out, that we booked into a resort where we had a hot tub in our room, so we could clean up and refresh. When I would travel in the Orient, and I did a lot of business in Japan, and business was good, but business was a challenge. You had to deal with jet lag. I'm illiterate in Japanese, so you had to deal with the language barrier. The Japanese like to stay out after office hours and drink a lot of sake. So again, it was a big challenge to get through the working in Japan. What was the win I gave myself during the course of my business trips to the Orient? I always made sure that my last stop in the Orient was to Hong Kong because my favorite bar in the world, Dan Ryan's, is in Hong Kong. And that was my win. You could sit at this U-shaped bar with about a half a dozen seats on each side. You'd sit at the base of the U, the middle seat, and you could talk to everyone at the bar. And there you are in Hong Kong. You get to eat at Dan Ryan's pastrami sandwiches, which is really nice after you've been on a diet of fish and rice. And you could talk to anyone sitting at that bar. And in Hong Kong at Dan Ryan's, everyone at that bar is an internationalist. That was my win. That was my treat. That was my reward for, slogging through all of this business travel long distance. Give yourself a win. I talked to one couple, very simple. They said, our win is we make sure at the end of our trip while we're still out on the road, we book into one of those little boutique, chain hotels that you find a lot in the United States. They say they do that because they have a washer and a dryer. And they wash their clothes because they love just coming home from their trip and unpacking and finding clean clothes and not dirty clothes. Give yourself a win.
Nice. It's nice to have a reward. Yeah. Mike, you came out of the rainforest and then you had a hot tub in your room. You're still wet, man.
That's interesting because when I did my scouting trip to the Osa Peninsula in Costa Rica, I'd hired a film director, I had hired a biologist, I hired an ornithologist. They took us down to the Osa Peninsula. The only way you could get to this national park in Costa Rica was you came in by single engine plane. They'd cut out a swatch of, the rainforest as the landing strip. There were big truck tires painted white to mark the landing strip. It was interesting. Those were in the days, not only before cell phones, but it was even before satellite phones. So you would stand there on the edge of the jungle and watch this plane leave you and recognize we are completely out of touch with civilization for, the next 10 days. But I remember coming off of that trip and I actually went through Tampa and booked into one of those hotels and sat in the hot tub. And that helped because, of course, I had chiggers all over my ankles and feet from that trip. So, yeah, give yourself a hot tub. That's a great win at the end of a trip.
I love a hot tub on a winter vacation. It's always a treat.
It's interesting. I'm talking about the Osa Peninsula in this trip. One of the things that was kind of fascinating in making these documentary films is scouting. So in this case, we scouted Corcovado National Park. It had been a national park in Costa Rica for 10 years. And I remembered while we were there, and I write about this trip. It was just fascinating. I write about it in the book. I remember going into the park headquarters and looking at the registration book where we had signed in when we first arrived. And I realized that they were still using the original registration book 10 years after they had been a national park. And I did a count, and the average annual visitation to Corcovado at that time, because at that time there were no roads to get there and you couldn't land a boat on the Pacific shoreline, the average annual visitation had been 300 people. I had a remarkable experience with a tropical biologist and ornithologist and my film director. We scouted this location for 10 days. But do you know what? At the end of that scout, we crossed it off the list, which is to say, this would be too difficult a location to actually bring in an IMAX film crew and shoot here, because we'd really have to provide, so many things, so much infrastructure that they don't have. So I was very lucky in my work sometimes to go to places like Corcovado National Park that I didn't even use in making the film, but I got the experience of being there.
Yeah, not only that, you got to see it from a unique perspective with a lot of different experts. I love that you had your science hat on there. Like, that's not a thing I would think to do, is go through the book and calculate the average annual number of visitors. I would have just signed the book and read a couple of the other quotes and been like, "Oh, that was awesome." So I love that. You can take the scientist out of, well, you know where I'm going. The self-care lesson you mentioned, getting the treat and all. Did you have to learn that the hard way? Did you get burned out at all? Because production is a very stressful job, and it's going to lead to my next question too. But did you burn out at any point?
Absolutely. You've overworked yourself. You've done too much. I write a story in my book about my first trip to Copenhagen. And I was supposed to meet a colleague there who was coming in from a different direction. I was coming in from Amsterdam. He was coming in from Frankfurt. We were to arrive early afternoon, and we would have just started working right away. And he was delayed. And it turned out that then I had this beautiful June day in Copenhagen, great weather, now all to myself. I checked into the hotel, dropped my bags, and I just went walking. And what a great way to get, introduced to a place and start to get immersed into a new location, a new culture, new language, new food, new people, is just take that time to walk about before you really start running with the work that you're doing. Someone once wrote about this, and they said, you need to leave time to have your emotional self catch up with your physical self. So that was a lesson, again, I learned, fortunately, and that I then applied to my future travels. It's like, all right, don't just hit the ground and start running, because you are going to burn out quickly over a period of days. Just get yourself adjusted to a new place, a new language, new people. Settle in, and then, go to work. And I always tried to treat my film crews, a bit that way as well. You wanted to have celebrations and some time off during the period that you had brought people to remote locations to shoot these documentary films.
Wow. Walk before you run.
I have to say one of the most difficult ones was shooting the film we did about Jane Goodall at her research site, Gombe, a national park in Tanzania. Again, there's no roads to get there. There's no runway to get there. You come in by boat. When we brought a film crew in, we really did have to build our infrastructure. While there were some buildings, we had to convert them to house a film crew. We had to build our own kitchen. This is where a producer on a film, a good producer, is gold. We went in on that film scout, and I had a great producer, a Canadian woman, And she was just outstanding in terms of recognizing here is all of the things we have to do just to set the stage, just to have the infrastructure, just to bring in a film crew and keep them as comfortable as possible to shoot this film. I was lucky. I was the executive producer. My big task then was to find the right producers in the world who could do the really hard work to make sure that film crews were in the best position to succeed in what they were doing.
I think one thing that travel really teaches you is that we're all resourceful individuals. And when you add projects in of this scale, you have to really be resourceful. To in that situation, you can imagine, okay, we literally have to, from the ground up, build places where people can eat and stay and so on. And you have to do that in a foreign country and navigate all that stuff. It's not always easy. What has travel taught you about your own resourcefulness?
Well, when you would do these film projects, the thing that made them successful was the time that you dedicated to the front end. So film scouting, that was one of the privileges of working as an executive producer. You would go into location with a very small team, and you weren't bringing in cameras and crews at that time. And you were just scouting locations to understand, can we actually shoot film in an efficient way? And the things that we're shooting, and wildlife is always a big challenge because, wild chimpanzees, they don't take film direction very well. So you just have to understand the environment to make sure that, okay, we can come in and we can be successful here. And there's going to be some great film footage that we're going to actually capture in these locations. So I spent a lot of time film scouting. I always say when I talk to film students, that's the thing you really want to be. You want to be an executive producer because you get to do a lot of scouting where the meter's not running. You're not paying for crews. You're not paying for camera rental. You're just making sure that you understand, is this the right place to bring a film crew to? So you actually travel farther in terms of the number of locations you do to film scout, to prepare. You go farther than you actually then come back to with a film crew to capture and put on film and share with your audiences worldwide. So yeah, be an executive producer or be a film scout. Then you're going to actually get to do more travel with a little less pressure than actually doing the filming itself.
Can you get me a gig as a narrator?
Yeah,
I know I don't have the celebrity name, but it's you got Bill Paxton, Robert Redford, Bryan Cranston. Can we add Jason Moore to this list? Come on, man.
Okay, I
want that easy money.
Well, when I share this podcast with all of my filmmaking friends, I'm going to say, yeah, you've got to consider Jason as a narrator for your next project. He's great, and he is.
Yeah, you're going to be like the guy that said science things is going to be the next narrator of our science project.
And don't forget to make sure you tell the film director, the film producer that, in order to do proper narration for the film, you're going to have to go scout the locations that the film is shooting. So,
certainly, because I need to soak up the vibe and really
exactly. There's the real win, the travel. Yeah.
In a world where, okay, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it.
I think you're on the road. You're on the road.
Okay. Give me my break, Mike. I'm looking for my break here. Since you were mentioning the jobs in film, I'm just wondering for anybody listening, this isn't a travel job we've actually covered on the podcast. We've covered a lot of different types of travel jobs that allow you to travel the world. You don't just jump in as an executive producer, of course. I'm just wondering for anybody listening that's curious, what are some of the easiest ways to break in to this industry in a way where, you get to travel and you can be a part of it and you get paid to travel and do the things like you've done. But, it's not going to take you 10 years to get to that point.
Well, it actually may take you 10 years to get to that point. I do tell young people, it's great to work on documentaries, film documentaries, but you usually get into it by coming in at the bottom, even on a volunteer position. So it's like if your ultimate goal is I want to travel and see the world, you really need to explore, not just, hey, I want to be a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker. There's so many resources, so many possibilities of things that you can do. You had on Ricardo Lima of World Packers, who talked about volunteer experiences that he has lined up in over 100 countries. There's groups like Workaway and Earthwatch that people, especially young people, should check into to see where there's opportunities to go working or house sitting or a farm stay or working for an NGO and getting that international experience. Another one that's interesting to me is you can sign up to be a Red Cross volunteer for 2-week periods. Now, you don't know where they're going to send you, but they're going to send you into some disaster site, right? It may be after an earthquake or after a tornado. And I think I might sign up for that. I think that sounds interesting to all of a sudden get the call that tells you where you're going and you don't know where in advance. And again, you're going to get out, you're going to see parts of the world, you're going to meet people, you're going to get those experiences that are just going to give you lifetime memories. So to young people, don't focus on one thing, go looking in a number of directions. And again, like my own experience, hopefully you're going to find that moving sidewalk. You're going to step onto it and you're not going to have to step off of it. But it does take work. It does take exploration. It does take coming in at the bottom, especially in the film world, to finally, make your way into where you're established in an industry like that.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for that professional advice there. The stars of the films, let's say, is the nature, of course, right? And in one case, you got Ring of Fire and volcanoes, but you think about some of the biggest stars would be the animals, right? I'm wondering for you, having had close encounters with a lot of these animals around the world, what have those encounters and those animals taught you about yourself?
Well, again, the great thing about travel is that you really do get a better understanding of yourself and an understanding of the world. And you recognize, as the title of my book says, the world has a big backyard. So open the gate and get out there. But it is such an interesting and diverse world that we live in. And I'm one, and I try and do this in my book by telling stories about some of these interesting and unique and remote locations. I'm one who says, go a little farther. Don't just take the obvious trip. So, for example, people talk about they want to go on safari in Africa, and they kind of default, and it's a good place to default to Tanzania or Kenya. Let's go see the great migration of the wildebeest. And again, I've had a crew film it, and it's just incredible. But when people ask me about going on safari in Africa, right now I say, don't consider those countries. I recommend you go to Southern Africa. I really recommend that you go to Namibia and Botswana. And don't worry that you're not going to see the wildlife that you expect to see, the big five of Africa. You're going to go on safari and you're going to see incredible wildlife, but you're also going to have the opportunity to see some, unique cultures and really find some remote locations. And you can find yourself in places that, people just haven't been to. You're going to find the right safari guide and you're just really going to be out there in the world. And you're going to really start to, grow your own self-identity of your place in the world and realize you're not the center of the universe by any means. Yeah. So Southern Africa is certainly on my list of places to go.
Any other places like that that jump to mind that you'd say these are places to go that are different than this place?
I know that you love road trips. And I don't want people to make the mistake and they might read my book and think, oh, this guy is just advocating that if you're going to have, eye-opening travel experiences, transformative experiences, that means I got to go deep sea diving on shipwrecks or, I have to go climb active volcanoes.
Extreme stuff. Yeah.
You can find these enriching experiences, these authentic experiences, much closer to home. So since I've written the book, my wife and I have gone on a couple of road trips. We have this house on the north shore of Lake Superior. It's just about 25 miles up the shore from the western tip at Duluth, which means we're about 125 miles short of the Canadian border as you continue up the lake heading north. Well, we just went and drove around Lake Superior, a great road trip. Yeah, close to home, as advertised. They say it's 1,300 miles. We came back to our lake house and we'd done 1,900 miles because there's all sorts of wonderful side trips. But there's one, it's like, okay, we're going to just start this trip, drive right out of our driveway and come back in a big circle and come back to where we are. There's something on my bucket list, again, close to home, that I haven't been to. It's a place called the Lost 40. When they surveyed the state of Minnesota back in the late 1800s, they made a mistake. They surveyed this acreage as a lake, which it is not. So it was never settled. It was never sold. It was never timbered. So I can do a day trip up to northern Minnesota to the Lost 40, where you can see evergreen trees, spruce trees, pine trees that are 200 to 300 years old. And this is one of those experiences that I want to make sure that I take young people to. Again, close to home, but an authentic experiences that is really going to, stretch that understanding of the world and kind of our place in it, not only in terms of physical place, but in terms of time, because now here we're looking at history and we're looking at a landscape that tells us this is how this part of the world was before the great settlement happened, before we arrived and timbered it all out. So consider those close to home, authentic experiences that you can go find. Again, drive past the amusement park. Head out a little farther for those authentic experiences.
We'll get back to the interview in just a moment. Now, back to the show. It's kind of tragic to think that there has to be a mistake in the mapping in order for a forest to
survive that
natural
long.
Growth. Yeah.
And I'm a museum person, and I think you can tell from, reading my book, when I advocate for these authentic experiences that are going to be great for, self-development. Museums are one of those. One of the strengths of museums, and this is worldwide, is they are not part of chains. So let's say you're like me and you love going to science museums. I grew up in the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. If you go from there to the Science Museum of Minnesota in St. Paul, completely different. You go to the Science Museum in Los Angeles, you go to Seattle, you go to the Natural History Museum in London, you go to museums anywhere in the world. They may all be science museums that you visit, but you're going to find these extraordinary, unique experiences. And again, they do emphasize authenticity. It's really one of the strengths of museums. And I've fallen in love in recent years with history centers, history sites. Again, authentic experiences. So as you travel, put that on your bucket list. Make sure we're going to go visit museums. My wife and I have now been to Iceland twice. I'm overwhelmed by how many little museums and historic sites there are in Iceland. And, we'd made a point of stopping at all of them. So all of a sudden you've given up on being out in nature. But boy, you sure are learning a lot about the history of a place and its people.
I love a good museum. It's such a great way to spend the day and the morning or whatever time you have.
Right. Build it into your schedule.
Well, I mean, you have a really unique take on museums coming from the industry. So, this is, of course, totally subjective, but what are your top 3 museum experiences in the world?
Well, I write about my top one in the book. I was in Stockholm and I was there for a business meeting, and on the agenda, they had arranged a visit to the Vasa Museum, which I've been there. Yeah. I knew nothing about. The Vasa was this warship that was built hundreds of years ago that was poorly engineered. And as it sailed out of the harbor and caught a wind gust, it tipped over and it sunk. Well, it sunk in the perfect place at the right depth where sunlight wasn't hitting it, in the cold waters of the Stockholm harbor, so that, it wasn't being eaten by some life form. It landed upright. Well, they made the decision to bring it back up, which was a Herculean effort. again, I write all about it in the book, but they brought this ship in and they've built a building around it. So it's the Vasa Museum. Museums are full of artifacts, hundreds, thousands of artifacts. Go down into the collections, go down into the basement. You'll see tens of thousands of artifacts. Well, the Vasa Museum has one artifact. It's the ship, but it is so marvelous. And the way it's been restored and taken care of, there is so much history to see and learn just by looking at this one ship and learning more about it and how it came to be. So the Vasa Museum in Stockholm was at the top of my list in terms of this is absolutely, eye-opening. Science museums in Japan have overwhelmed me. I guess it's no surprise that you would find that the Japanese used a lot of advanced technology as they do in their daily lives, and so they've brought it into museums. So they've done wonderful things there, and I am partial to the museums in Chicago, and not just because I grew up there, but they are all really well established, high standards of operation. And continuing, just to stay current in terms of being museums. So the Field Museum of Natural History, the Adler Planetarium, the Museum of Science and Industry, the University of Chicago has a little museum that's on Middle Eastern artifacts and histories. Again, just remarkable places, a really great city for museums, as a number of cities. London is certainly one of those cities with great museums to visit. So it's like, don't follow my list, but just make sure when you're out there, just put some museum visits on your list, and you're going to find some interesting discoveries along the way.
That's great stuff. And you covered several time zones there with Japan, Stockholm, and Chicago. So well done. The strangest museum you know about?
I've avoided those museums, and I understand that in Reykjavik they have the penis museum, I think it's called, where they've collected all of these penises from various, life forms on Earth. I think I have that right, but I've made sure that I've avoided that one. There's a lot of, kind of esoteric museums in terms of what they've collected, right? I was in a paperclip museum at one point somewhere in Illinois. It's like very bizarre, very, very focused. But sometimes people, they just want to create a museum. So you have to be a little bit wary of, you might stumble into something where you just think, this is just kind of bizarre. This is not to my taste. So I'd like to stick to the big museums as opposed to some.
Are those museums not really part of the circuit, sort of?
Yeah, it's interesting because museums have a very high standard, and of course they have professional associations. And any museum, truly professional museum, has to go through a formal accreditation process every 10 years, and those are the museums I like to stick to. Museums that have collections, you're going to see a lot of cool stuff. Museums that have curators, the bigger museums are just going to have people that are doing some marvelous work. And one of the things that museums have done a lot of in recent history is they've tried to open the doors to the back room. So when you have people working in labs, they're now visible labs. You can actually, stand at a window and you can talk to real scientists who are doing some real work and some real collecting on whatever it might be. And they've been trained to engage with visitors, especially young visitors. So that's to the credit of big museums that they want to be more public. They want to connect more with people.
Yeah, I love that. There's something about seeing that, you see the visual of somebody dusting off an old bone or something. You see like that. Look, I could tell my kids that's a job somebody has. Somebody studies this. This is something you can do for a living. It just kind of opens up when you see somebody doing it visually, it just, something changes,
Absolutely. And again, that is to the credit of museums that they have evolved to recognize that they have to bring these people out of the back room and make their work visible and give them the opportunity, which they end up, the curators, loving, They now get to interact with visitors, and they get to get engaged, and they're proud to show off their work and talk about it.
You had a section in your book on practicing mindfulness, which is not something you see in every travel book, but I think is maybe something that should be in every travel book in a way. Can you share why you included that?
Because again, learning the hard way of how important it is. And finding it reinforced. I listened to your podcast on the psychology of travel with Dr. Andrew Stevenson, a great podcast that I think everybody should listen to. He referred to it as flow state, mindfulness. Mindfulness, bringing it down to its basics. Sometimes people can complicate what it means, but I like to say what it really is and where its value comes in for travel is you suspend your immediate judgment. You don't overreact. And this is one of these life lessons, travel tips that becomes not only important for travel, but in your everyday life. If there is one thing that I really have to keep working on, especially when I'm at home, it's don't overreact. So suspend immediate judgment, don't overreact, and just unlock your curiosity. And I tell that story in my book about my trip to Namibia, where I really crossed a line in dealing with a public official. I just, interjected into a conversation that was going on between two people. And it was just the wrong thing to do. I didn't practice mindfulness. I should have just suspended my immediate judgment of the situation. I overreacted, and I almost got us into a lot of trouble. As our guide there said to me, he pulled me to the back of the room when I made this mistake, and he said, just be quiet or you're going to get us arrested. Practice mindfulness, suspend your judgment. And that leads to this, great travel tip of respect. Respect the people, respect the place, respect yourself. Don't overreact. Unlock your curiosity.
In that section, I was surprised because the story you shared to illustrate some of these principles was being at a bullfight in Spain and using the mindfulness to sort of, like you said, suspend immediate judgment. And I found that surprising because it's just not the story you would think about when you're thinking about mindfulness, right? You're thinking about more of like a meditative kind of thing, but in an uncomfortable, the way you describe it, this uncomfortable situation, I guess, or seeing, well, I mean, you tell the story.
Yeah.
You want to share a bit more?
I was at an industry conference. There were museum people from all over the world. We were being hosted in Valencia during the Fallas Festival. And, if you read any of the books of the top things you should do in your life, the Fallas Festival in Valencia that I've been fortunate enough to be to twice is certainly one of those you want to put on your list. A remarkable thing that happens there every year around the spring, the vernal equinox. So we were guests at the bullfights, which they would hold in conjunction with the Fallas Festival. And of course, most of us, including myself, had never been to a bullfight. And there you are sitting with the crowd. And of course, the bull always loses. And, they go through the so-called fight. But at the end, the matador, who's been, waving his cape as the bull charges, now pulls out his sword and sticks it, at the back of its head and hits the right place. And this large animal is bleeding profusely and falls over and dies. And the crew comes out and with the horses, and they, tie the horses up to the bull, and they drag it out of the ring. And there's this long trail of blood that takes, goes across the ring to take the bull out. Well, there were a lot of people that were in my group, and this is no surprise and no disrespect to them, but they just didn't want to see any more of this. And they got up and left. As a matter of fact, most of the people I was with I was with, and most of the Americans who were part of the group got up and left. And that was a moment where I said to myself, practice mindfulness, suspend immediate judgment, don't overreact, don't get up and say, I'm not going to watch any more of this. Just unlock your curiosity and just, stay in your seat and get comfortable. And it turned out to be an interesting experience just because I met a colleague who we ended up doing a project with who was from the Science North, a science museum in Sudbury, Ontario. So again, I practiced mindfulness, turned into a good experience, but don't overreact, which was an easy thing to do if it was your first experience in watching a true bullfight.
If you're feeling uncomfortable and it's you're in a place where this is a cultural thing, a cultural event in this country, and you don't feel comfortable or you don't agree with it, it can be hard to sit with those feelings.
Right. But there again, you've got to learn to practice mindfulness. Don't just suspend your immediate judgment.
Well, that led to the conversation you mentioned, which led to the Jane Goodall project. And you had a pretty interesting story there. What's she like?
It's interesting because as we were working with Jane Goodall and even since, people's first question to me is she really like that? And they all mean the same thing because for so many decades, there's been documentaries about her, National Geographic films about her, books about her. She's very visible, public appearances. And people say, is she really like that? I'm not, what do they mean? Well, what they mean. And I have to say it was an easy question to answer because yes, she's really like that. If I've ever met anyone who should be canonized and be made a saint, I'm telling you, Dr. Jane Goodall is it. It's a true privilege to be in her presence, let alone to end up making a film about her. Because we had done our research and we had gotten together these discussion groups of people. And one of the prompting questions you would ask them in these discussion groups was, okay, write down the name of famous female scientists. We wanted to just see what people knew about female scientists, who they thought of when we asked the question. And Jane Goodall's name would come up frequently. But when you talk to the group, people didn't know what happened to Jane. We remember her from these old, National Geographic shows. But what happened to her, and what happened to the critters that she studied? People weren't sure exactly what primate it was. Was it monkeys or what was it? Was it orangutans? No, it's chimpanzees. So we recognized that it was time to do a new film about Jane Goodall. But the emphasis of the story was going to be on the next generation, the new generation of scientists who were studying wild chimpanzees with new techniques and for the first time DNA analysis. And it was a great opportunity then to tell both her backstory and the current story and the story that might lie ahead. And when I say we, I was with the CEO of Science North in Sudbury, the gentleman I met at the bullfight. He had called me a few months after we had been together in Valencia and meeting the first time. And he said, hey, Mike, he said, guess who was just in our museum in Sudbury, Ontario? I say, okay, who? And he said, Dr. Jane Goodall. And she saw an IMAX film. And it was an IMAX film on mountain gorillas. And I said, well, how did she like it? And he said, she said, great format, wrong primate. And he said to me, what do you think about possibly doing a film, an IMAX film about Jane Goodall? Do you think the world is waiting for it, needs it? That's when we did our research and said, it's really a great opportunity to tell the updated story. As it turns out, at that point, all of Jane Goodall's field notes, and we're talking about the longest running study of animals in the wild, all those field notes at the time were being stored at the University of Minnesota. I could just go right down the street from the museum in St. Paul, meet the people that were doing primate research there, It was a great fit between, our partner in Canada and ourselves. We could both work financing on each side of the border. So to start this project, of course, we had to get Jane Goodall and the Jane Goodall Institute to sign on. So we set up a meeting with the Jane Goodall Institute Canada. Their board meeting was being held in Montreal, and Dr. Goodall was going to be there. And so I flew from Minneapolis to Montreal. My colleague from Sudbury came over to Montreal, and we were on their agenda on a Saturday morning. I remember it well, at 10 o'clock, and we get to the offices. And as we sit down, the executive director of the Institute comes out of the meeting room, and she says, "We're running behind schedule already. Can you guys stick around?" Well, I've just flown in from Minneapolis to meet Dr. Jane Goodall. Am I going to stick around? I'll stick around here all week if I have to, right, to meet her. So as they're in the conference room, the board and Dr. Goodall meeting, I kind of look in to see where she's sitting. And now it comes time for us to be on the agenda. The executive director comes out of the conference room and says, "Gentlemen, come on in. We're going to bring in a couple more chairs for you." Well, I took a chair and I made sure that I sat right at the corner of the table. Dr. Goodall was at the head of the table at that end. I wanted to make sure that I was sitting, at her right hand, because if we blew this pitch, this idea for an IMAX film, I at least wanted to be able to say, "Hey, I got to sit next to Dr. Goodall, Jane Goodall, for 20 minutes. Well, it was interesting as we did our presentation on what our research had revealed, how this was a great opportunity for a film, talked about the films we made. We had brought some props, and I actually had a video box of the Ring of Fire film we did, the film that we spent 7 years chasing volcanoes to make. I mean, it was good testament to the fact that we could pull off one of these projects. We could do one of these films. And during this 20 minutes that we had on their agenda, sitting next to Dr. Goodall, she just kind of kept looking at the video box, and she didn't say anything. The board members, of course, had a lot of questions that we answered. Jane Goodall didn't have any questions. And so now it's 20 minutes has gone by. The executive director of the Jane Goodall Institute in Canada says, "Gentlemen, that's your agenda. That's your 20 minutes that we gave for you. Thank you for coming." And as we started to get up, Jane Goodall put her hand on my left forearm. She stopped me from getting up. And she said, "Mike, I carry around symbols of hope, things that tell the story of life's rejuvenation. And I don't have anything from Mount St. Helens, something that tells that story after the eruption of the volcano." That image of Mount St. Helens was on the video box. She says, "Mike, I don't have that. I need that." That's all she says. She doesn't say
what she's thinking about the whole time, looking at the box.
She doesn't say, "Could you get something for me? Would you get something?" She didn't say, "Please." No. She just said, "No. I need one." That was it.
Right.
I leave the room and I realize, talk about a moment of practicing mindfulness. I am no longer a film executive producer. I am now a disciple of Dr. Jane Goodall, and I have to go find this artifact for her. Well,
you're on a quest.
I'm on a quest. Oh, well, it's great. Okay, we filmed up at Mount St. Helens. I can I can give a call to a guy and say, "Hey, look, I just met with Jane Goodall, and here's what she needs, and can you provide this?" And someone sends me this great specimen of this tree material, with all of the scientific explanation of how it's coming back more quickly than I expected, in downwind from Mount St. Helens. And of course, I work in a museum, so I take this leafy matter and I take it down into our collections people, and I say, "Hey, let's mount this properly, on acid-free paper and put a little cover on it and make sure on the back we've given the proper explanation." So I have this little artifact, this leafy material that tells the story of the rejuvenation of life after the eruption of Mount St. Helens. And then I get Jane Goodall's travel schedule. She is she's a woman in motion. nobody can remember the last time pre-pandemic that she ever spent, 3 nights in the same place. She's in Washington, D.C. one night giving a lecture, and she's in Grand Forks, North Dakota the next night giving one. Well, there's only one way you can get between those two destinations quickly, and that means you're going to fly through the Minneapolis airport. And sure enough, I get her travel schedule. This is at a time when, you didn't have TSA. You could actually go with someone to a gate, or you could be at a gate in an airport and wait for someone to get off the airplane. And so I look at the flight schedule. I see what gate this flight is going out to Grand Forks is. And I go to the gate. And of course, there's Dr. Jane Goodall sitting there, waiting with everyone else to board this plane. And I simply went and I sat down next to her and I handed her this artifact. And she again put her hand on my forearm and she said, "Mike, let's talk about making that IMAX film." And off we went on the project.
That is incredible. What a moment that must have been of triumph for you to walk in, to find her, and to sit down. And a month later,
absolutely,
here you go.
and yes,
not only that, but you came with the goods. I mean, you really came with something that was. I
delivered the goods. I had been, made a disciple, and I came with the goods, and we made the film.
But I love that. Yeah,
we made the film, and it turned out terrific. It was a challenge working at her research site, but it's a great story in terms of the research that's still ongoing today, and the young researchers who are just doing remarkable things.
I love that she collects those things that represent the rejuvenation of life. I mean, by the way. I collect artifacts. It's just what an inspiring.
Yeah, it's all about hope for her. She has a book entitled "Reason for Hope," and she really conveys hope and instills that in you. And these artifacts that tell stories of that rejuvenation that just give us all hope. So she's just masterful at doing that for us. Yes, is she really like that? Yes, she really is like that.
Awesome story. What are you most proud of?
I think, again, inspiring young people. As I've said, the greatest gift of all you can give to young people is travel. So with a lot of young people, school groups visiting museums, we could introduce them to new places, new experiences, things they might not even see in their own lifetime by going out and capturing these locations and events in the world's largest film format, the IMAX film format. And now on a personal basis, my wife and I are very lucky to have 13 nieces and nephews. And we really don't just travel for ourselves. We want to make sure that we're going traveling and giving great consideration to the young people in our lives and going to places that they're going to find eye-opening and awe-inspiring and authentic and help their own self-development. I write in my book about a nephew of mine who is now 23 years old. And my thing with him was I started taking him on spring breaks when he was 8 years old. So he grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota. So the first place I took him was Chicago. It was the first time he'd been on an airplane, a great way to introduce, a kid to flying, a short flight. And Chicago, what a remarkable city for a young kid, going to museums and such. So when he was 8, we went to Chicago. When he was 9, we went to St. Louis. And when he was 10, I figured he's old enough. So I asked him the question, where would you like to go on spring break? And with a short hesitation, he said, New York or Tokyo. So when he was 10, I took him to New York. Great experience, spring break. We were there on St. Patrick's Day. He got to see how adults behave after they've spent too much time during the course of a day drinking, which may be why he's not much of a drinker and kind of a health nut. But when he was 12, I took him to Tokyo. I had been to Tokyo. I'd done work in Tokyo. I'd never been there as a so-called tourist. I contacted a colleague I had worked there. She spent a day with us, our first day there, taking us around, giving us an orientation. Uh, I think it was a wonderful trip. He was jet lagged a lot. In one case, that was to our advantage because we woke up at 3:30 in the morning and went down to the fish market to get in line, which you had to do early in the morning because they only allowed 150 people in to see the morning tuna auction. We were able to do that early one morning. My spouse has wondered if it was too much to ask a 12-year-old, to take an international flight to be in a place that was so foreign to them, certainly. Well, just in the past few months, my now 23-year-old nephew, this kid I took on spring break trips, he had to show me his new tattoo. He pulled up his pants leg, and on one of his calves, he now has this Japanese palace with a samurai swordsman. And because we were there on spring break, we saw cherry blossoms. So his tattoo has these cherry blossoms that are floating over the scene. You can give a kid a thing, whatever that thing might be. And over time, their interest is going to wane and it's going to get lost along the way. But if you give a kid a trip, if you give a kid some authentic travel experience, you are going to create a lifetime memory. And I think for this nephew of mine, that's sort of the living proof. At age 12, I take him to Tokyo, and here he is 10 years later, and he's got this memory now tattooed on his body. So I feel really proud of taking young people traveling, and it's the thing I really like to do.
Wow. And you get the gift of, you gave that gift, and now 10 years later, you get to see how that impacted him and made a difference in his life.
A lifelong
really,
memory.
Really cool.
He'll have it forever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The website, MikeDayTravels.com. We'll link up to it. And your book, The World Has a Big Backyard, Adventure Travel Stories from an IMAX Documentary Filmmaker, which is super cool.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning the website, because people can go there and they can read some excerpts from my book. They can order the book directly from there, and they can make contact with me. And I'm, very open to people reaching out to me. You make contact; it'll come by email, and I'm glad to start any kind of dialogue to talk about all the things I have done or am doing. I certainly have, I think, some. Even though I'm retired from my work, I have some interesting trips ahead. The common question is, and I'll ask it hoping that you are going to do it anyway. The question is, where are you going to go next? And I say to people, before you address the where question, consider first the when question. And I learned this first back when I was in college, and a buddy of mine was going off on spring break to hike through the Grand Canyon. He came back from the trip. Of course, we said, how was it? He said, it was during the period of the full moon. The skies were clear and it was outstanding. And it was like, oh, that's something to give some consideration to, especially if you're out camping. What's the phase of the museum? When am I going to go? Maybe I'm going to go during the full moon. I had another experience. I had to go to this my first time to Stockholm. For a business meeting. Now, if you were going to go on holiday from the United States, first time, in the Scandinavian countries, you'd probably default to say, we're going in the summer, or maybe the less touristy time, the shoulder season, spring or fall. This business meeting in Stockholm was in February. I have to tell you, what a learning experience. I am now so conscious of winter traveling. Going to a place like Stockholm for your first trip in the winter was just fabulous. I think you see more of the place and the culture and the real life. It's not full of tourists. People don't recognize you as a tourist because you're like everyone else. You're bundled up. They don't know if you are a man, a woman, or a beast in, all of your clothing. So the when question is an interesting one to ask. And also the why question. So why are we traveling? Consider your hobbies. Do you like to bicycle? Do you like to kayak? Are you a beekeeper, a bowler? It might help direct you as to where you're going, because I want you to take those hobbies with you and explore your hobbies in other places. So one hobby I think we all have is eating. So when you're traveling, obviously, spend some time getting interested in the food of other places and other cultures. My wife and I were just recently did a 16 days out on a road trip, driving the ring road and beyond in Iceland. And we recognized that our first dinner, there's fish soup on the menu. Let's try the fish soup. And the next day at the lunch menu, there's fish soup on the menu. Let's try the fish soup. So we said, hey, let's go looking for the best fish soup in Iceland. So that kind of became part of the why are we in Iceland? And I think we did find it. It wasn't, part of our original intent. But again, it's like the why question. Why are we here? We're here to find the best fish soup. So ask the when question, ask the why question. It might help you to lead you to some new places in terms of where are we going. An example for myself, where I'm going in the future. I have a trip ahead in April 2024 to Waco, Texas. Why is a world traveler going to Waco, Texas?
Exotic Waco, Texas.
Exotic Waco, Texas. Well, you'll read in my book that I have chased total eclipses of the sun. I have been to 5 total eclipses, 4 of them outside of the U.S., the furthest away in Colombia, South America. Yes, I was part of the millions of people who traveled into the shadow of the moon for what was called the Great American Eclipse that came across the U.S. From the West Coast to the East Coast. This was in August of 2017. Well, the next eclipse to cross the U.S. Is in April of 2024. They're calling that the Great North American Eclipse, as the shadow of the moon, racing faster than the speed of sound across the landscape, hits land in Mexico, Mazatlan, comes up through Texas, the central U.S., Indianapolis, goes across the southern shores of a couple of Great Lakes, which is to say Cleveland and Rochester, New York are going to be in the shadow path. And it continues on up through Canada and then off the face of the earth. So my why is I want to see this total eclipse of the sun. So my where becomes, where is the best place to see it? There's a lot of interesting locations. I'd love to be in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York to watch it from there. But the primary consideration in chasing total solar eclipses is the weather. The Great American Eclipse of August of 2017 had great weather across the United States. There were very few people who were clouded out from seeing the eclipse. But in April of 2024, the weather is going to be more problematic across this eclipse path. So I've done my homework. You want to be prepared if you really want to make sure you see the eclipse to actually run. I write about the experience of going to Winnipeg for an eclipse and getting up in the middle of the night, the day before the eclipse, and driving well west into Manitoba to give myself a better weather chance. And we were successful to see the eclipse. So I'm starting in Waco, being prepared to drive fast and far north or south and stay very close or in the shadow path of the moon to give myself the best chance of actually seeing the eclipse and not being weathered out. And, that's what's great about the why. Why am I going someplace to see an eclipse? You don't get to pick the places. The shadow path of the moon is always going to be less than 170 miles wide. It's going to be running fast. So it's like you gotta go to these places where the shadow of the moon is. And it may not be close and it may not be convenient, but I think you're going to find, like going to any new place, you're going to find interesting people, food, culture, history. It's going to be a great why for traveling. And I have another one lined up. There's a total eclipse of the sun that goes by Iceland. And that's going to happen, I think it's in it's going to happen in August of 2026. The weather prospect in Iceland any time of year for seeing an eclipse of the sun is terrible, but for me, that may be one I go to and I'll get weathered out, and that'll be okay because, hey, I get to go back to Iceland and have an excuse to be there. So,
and you get to have more fish soup.
and I get to have more. I continue my life quest to find the best fish soup in Iceland. Yeah.
You're not going to get a phone call from the shadow path of the moon asking, "Hey, Mike, would you like to holiday in the Maldives?"
That's right. No.
So as a science professional, when you're researching these locations, I'm sure you're checking with your local astrologist to make sure that the weather's going to be okay then too. Right?
Whatever it takes, whatever it takes, but be ready to run. Yeah. I do have, and I give some credit to when I went to see the Great American Eclipse in my book to a meteorologist from the Twin Cities who was down there for the eclipse as well. He was at a slightly different location from me, but boy, he was getting a lot of texts from me to say, how's the weather looking for my spot? How's the weather looking for my spot? Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, I like how you reverse it there with the whys, and like you said with the fish soup example, if you don't have the why beforehand, you can perhaps discover the why along the way. You could find your own fish soup
thing to
why
right
somewhere else is what I'm trying to say. Mike Day, thank you, man. Congrats on everything and good luck with the upcoming trips and enjoying life and continuing to impact the youngsters that are around you with your work and everything that you're doing.
Well,
I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you, Jason. Let me leave you just by saying two things. First of all, the most important thing, which is thank you. It's really a privilege to be on your podcast. I recommend it highly to people. You've got this, 10 years of podcasts. Podcasts are great because there's a library and so many things to learn and so many interesting people to hear from on your podcast. And so thank you for being part of it. The other thing I have to say is, I have a great aunt who lived to be 100. She passed away in 2014. True story about Aunt Haney. Aunt Haney, at the age of 16, ran away from home and joined the circus. She became a tightrope walker. Well, this is back in the days in the 30s when circuses were traveling by train. And Aunt Haney said that when the circus, would break down and everyone might head in different directions, they never said goodbye to each other. They only said, "We'll see you on down the road." And Aunt Haney was a woman of letters, wrote these beautiful handwritten letters in wonderful cursive, right up until she was in her late 90s. And she always signed her letters, "We'll see you on down the road." So the two things I want to leave you with are both thank you and we'll see you on down the road.
Oh, man, that's heartwarming. Thanks for that. And thanks for your time today. And I'll see you on down the road.
See you on down the road, Jason. Thank you.
Take care. There you have it. I want to thank Mike once again for stopping by the show and sharing his experience. Of course, the book, The World Has a Big Backyard. You can find all of the links over at mikedaytravels.com. We'll link up to that and in the show notes. Appreciate his time and sharing his wisdom and in some of his stories today. Now, before I let you go, two things. I am going to leave you with a quote, and also I want to give a shout out to a listener in this community who just dropped me an email literally when I was about to record this. I was like, let me just check my email and see if anybody's checked in recently. This one popped right at the top 15 minutes ago at the time of the recording. I'm like, I got to share this right now. This is from Alex, subject, pursuing my dream to live abroad. By the way, side note, I share these stories from the community because I just think it's so inspiring for me and for everybody else listening to know that there are others listening out there who are, doing things to make their travel dreams a reality. As cheesy as that might sound, it's true. And I love to share these real life stories because I find them inspiring, and hopefully wherever you're listening, they give you some inspiration as well. And I'm saying this to encourage you to reach out with any story you have, anything you want to share. It doesn't have to be, some crazy travel success story. It can be really anything. I find so much inspiration in hearing people's stories and then getting the privilege to share them with the community here is such a gift. So I do encourage you to reach out. You can always email me anytime, leave a voicemail in my box. Okay, Alex said, "Hi, my name is Alex. Love the podcast. Continue to listen every week. Wrote you about a year ago to tell you about my solo journey I took to Alaska. I just wanted to give you a quick update on my travel experience. After taking the leap to do my first solo adventure, I wanted to continue this momentum and try and live out another travel dream of mine, which was living abroad. I've realized through your podcast there are plenty of options to make living abroad work into my life. So a few months ago, when my girlfriend was offered a long-term job in London, I felt ready to pack up and take the leap. Since I don't have a travel visa, I'll be staying here for 6 months, but figured it was a really good quote-unquote trial run to see if I'd be interested in doing something like this again. For somebody who was nervous to move into a different culture, England was much easier to assimilate into, especially being from the US. I'm not sure if I would have been brave enough to uproot my life and move abroad without getting to hear real stories from people who've prioritized travel in their life on the podcast. And, just goes on to say some nice words. Ask for some advice on meeting people while living abroad. And I'll answer that in a minute. But I just want to say congrats to Alex. And one thing I wanted to point out with this story to share with you is just this idea of taking smaller steps and building momentum. Exactly what he did. He took his big solo adventure first. And then he even said in the email he wanted to, I can't find where the line is, but he wanted to go off of that momentum and continue. And then here it goes. He wanted to continue this momentum and live out another travel dream, living abroad. And for him, that felt comfortable to go to a place where they speak his native tongue. And, he was able to assimilate a bit easier. So, sometimes we can get into these comparison traps where we might hear a story in this podcast or somewhere else about somebody doing this crazy thing. Doing the crazy thing like walking across a continent or whatever, that's not for everybody. But the idea that you can just take small steps towards your next travel goals and then build momentum that way and then just kind of piggyback off that momentum and use it to your advantage, go for it. That can work in travel, that can work in business and life. You just have to build a little bit of momentum. And oftentimes that just starts with a small thing. For Alex, it was just a solo trip that he took. And that was kind of the thing that kicked it off for him. So, don't not do something because it doesn't feel quote unquote big enough. Sometimes it's those small steps that lead to the big things for you. And of course, big is relative to everybody. I'm done ranting now. You can tell I just had a cup of coffee, but I wanted to share that. And to just answer Alex's question for anybody looking to meet some people living abroad, of course you can go on and there's all sorts of, social media groups like Facebook, for example. I think there's an expat group for every single city out there. So you can join those and you can interact. I know that's not ideal for everybody. It's not certainly something that I enjoyed doing. I haven't met a lot of people through the Facebook group here, but I think, one of the most important things is just having the intention to get out and connect with people and using that as your driving force and doing what's comfortable for you. That might mean going to local meetups, might mean going to, if you have a particular hobby, like stand-up comedy or whatever, music, finding these open jam sessions or open mic nights, go to a thing like that and then just start meeting people and just have the intention. And I think just being honest with people and letting them know, hey, I'm new here. You could almost make it like a light thing, right? It doesn't have to be heavy. I'm really looking to meet people. You just be like, hey, I'm American. You guys are, in Alex's cases, you guys are from, how do you connect with people from London? What do they like? What how do you cross that cultural connection? I want to meet some people. What are some cool things to do? People, I find, generally just love to help people out that are strangers in a strange land. I feel like they're excited to kind of share a bit about their culture, to give their tips and advice. And of course, you have to take everybody's advice and tips with a grain of salt. But, you find the people that you like and listen to the advice that resonates with you. And just really not be afraid to put yourself out there and just be vulnerable. Let people know you're looking to connect. You're new in town. You want to learn what are some cool things to do. What do the locals do? What should I order for food here? Where's the best place to eat around here? Just that kind of stuff. You'll find people will really open up. So I just wanted to share that quickly. I much prefer that tact as opposed to trying to meet somebody from a social media group or something. But then again, I'm old school. You guys all know that. So, all right, enough ranting by me. By the way, don't forget to sign up. Speaking of rants, if you want some written rants, you can go over to zerototravel.com/newsletter and sign up over there for the free weekly newsletter. Got some cool stuff going on. Would love to connect with you there. I'm going to pull a quote out of the drawer. Man, this coffee's kicking in. If you're still with me, thank you so much. Let's see what this one says. Oh, this is a good one for me from Zheng Zan. Quote, stop talking and thinking, and there's nothing you will not be able to know. End quote. Perfect. I'm going to do that now. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a part of this community. You're a superstar. Have a great day. See you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by ZeroToTravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.